You're listening to A Quality Podcast with your hosts, John Thacker Jr. and Jake Harris.
There's a perception of what cultural adaptation should look like when it comes to industry or just kind of anything. And there's such a difference. And I don't know that it is something you can take from a book. And I absolutely have seen those, not even just with Lean Six Sigma or industry, but in the military as well, where they're like, but this is how I was taught leadership was supposed to work, or this is how I was taught to implement this particular thing. And it doesn't meet in the middle because, culture it's weird that it's named a soft skill because it's not a soft skill. It's more of a critical skill.
And welcome everybody to A Quality Podcast. I'm your host, John Thacker Jr. We will not be joined by Jake Harrell today, so be sure to shame him as much as you can publicly and send him a lot of hate mail on LinkedIn, etc. Hold on. It looks like I'm getting a call from Jake, so let me just get this real fast. Hey, sorry you couldn't make it today, man. Yeah, I know. Yes, you are a piece of shit. No, we all agree. Everybody out here in YouTube land was like, the fuck, man, this guy just keeps blowing us off. So yeah. Oh my, really? I'm so sorry, man. Oh my gosh. No, I thought that you just, I don't know, slept in or something, but what the? Okay. Well, how much is bail? Jesus. I'm not made out of money. Yeah. Well, that was your first mistake. You're just gonna have to stay there, man. You're in Texas. I can't fly down there. All right. Let me see what I can do. Well,
He colored outside of the lines, didn't he?
He colored outside the lines, folks. You heard it here, folks. First, Mr. Jake Harrell picked up by the popos. So
No means no, Jake. No
if he
means
doesn't
no.
show. We're happy to have with us today Phil Ranck, founder of Lean Alaska. Phil, how are you doing today?
Good. Just enjoying the good Alaska weather.
Yeah. So we're going through a really weird weather pattern here. We had winter right up until like 3 weeks ago, and then we had summer. So today is the first spring day we've had all year, and it was actually really beautiful. So
Yeah, it seems to be pretty consistent. In Alaska, we have snow all through our winters, and right around March timeframe, it starts to go away. In April, things get good. Usually, it just kind of teeters until June or July. But it's been this year 9 days in a row, I think, over above 70 degrees. But for us, because of the angle, the sun's like 90, so you're dying of heat stroke with no AC. But they recorded it as one of the earliest and warmest summers in Alaska. So, hopefully it stays for a while longer.
I need to move to Alaska then, because we had snow in April over here in northern Maryland. So, well, we're excited to have you on the show. We've been following your content, of course, online, and had a chance to kind of go back and forth a few times. Really excited about, what you bring to Alaska, which, I think for most of us in the contiguous 48 states, Alaska is like, something you see on the Discovery Channel. I wouldn't say it's not real, but it's kind of not real. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. When we moved here, again, as I mentioned earlier, I'm here because the military, offered me the opportunity to come here before I retired, but we really weren't sure what we were walking into. So I literally bought a 20-foot container and stuffed it full of everything in Lowe's and Tractor Supply I could find, because I was like, I'm moving to Alaska. They don't sell stuff like this in Alaska, right? If you can't cut the tree down, how are you building a house? Yeah, I was an idiot. Like, Lowe's is actually closer to my house now than it was in North Carolina. We have every eatery on the planet you can find. So I was like, well, don't I feel dumb?
But there is a disconnect in Alaska from the rest of the world's kind of education system. And I know we have remote stuff now. I actually took classes, grad classes online. Like you can do that now from real schools. But where I'm at, pretty close to the Beltway, there is just a dozen different connections, events, conferences, all of that, for education, engineering, Six Sigma, Lean, all of that, to pick from, like, every week. And that doesn't exist up there in the frozen tundra.
No.
You had a great opportunity to get something started up there and serve your community, and also bring with you the experience from the military, which, the contacts that I have, including my brother, in the military, it's a great way to make your bones, because at the end of the day, the Army is logistics, the military is logistics, right? That's what you're doing all the time. So you get to see, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and practice over and over and over again, right?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah.
So we're excited to have you on, and we wanted to talk today about cultural adaptation. And this kind of hit home for me because I frequently have these conversations with peers and consultants, and especially, I think, mostly folks that are internal consultants. These are folks whose job title is like continuous improvement manager or a continuous improvement engineer. And they get frustrated, and they're kind of venting to me because the company is not aligned with the textbook they read. And so cultural adaptation can be, kind of a critical part of actually being effective in your role, or maybe moving on, right, to something else. So take us down this road, Phil.
Yeah. So, and I've definitely followed your post on LinkedIn and know where you're generally at on it from what you post, and feel like we're a lot aligned on that, because I absolutely agree. There's a perception of what cultural adaptation should look like when it comes to industry or just kind of anything. And there's such a difference. And I don't know that it is something you can take from a book. And I absolutely have seen those, not even just with Lean Six Sigma or industry, but in the military as well, where they're like, but this is how I was taught leadership was supposed to work, or this is how I was taught to implement this particular thing. And it doesn't meet in the middle, because culture it's weird that it's named a soft skill, because it's not a soft skill. It's more of a critical skill. And it adapts to every single person, every single leader, all the time. Where I think I was first able to start recognizing it, the longer I went through the military, I would stay in the same unit and I would stay with the same soldiers, but the leadership would continue to change. And you'd have this weird back and forth, because every time new leadership came in, they're like, oh, the culture is going to change, they'll make things better. And you'd wait and nothing would change. And you're like, wow, but I thought that's what the leader was supposed to do. And then soldiers would change as well, and you still wouldn't see this paradigm shift at all. So there would be somebody that says, but this is how it's supposed to work. We do this and this changes that. And that's not necessarily the case. So this is the same thing when you get to industry. The customers that we've worked with primarily on the larger scale, they say, well, if we just do this, then leadership will support that. And, I know there's a lot of this and that. There's a lot of ambiguity in there, because it's different for every situation. And it's just not the case. And what I've also found sometimes is, the ability to change culture is just not in everybody. Is not something you can read from a book, in my opinion. It's something that you kind of learn over time through experience. So, yeah, it's as we've continued to go down that path, and I watch all of these things unfold with clients, it becomes hard. Like there was one very small coffee kiosk here in Alaska, and they had a practitioner that was helping them, somebody in process improvement. And they came in, and it was a very nice family running a small kiosk. And they said, the practitioner said, well, if you want to be successful, you have to move this machine over here and put in ventilation. You make all these changes for layout, balancing, design. And they said, but it's going to cost you about $30,000. And the small family, like, well, we're a small coffee kiosk. We don't have money buried under the kiosk. This isn't the Rockefellers. We're broke. So And he got really angry at them. And it was a clear indication he had no ability to understand things from their perspective, which helps with that cultural adaptation. It was like, this is the way it has to be, or this just isn't going to work. So so you're watching how culture evolves, really hits home. And we tell everybody, they come to the courses, one of the things we do heavily is training. And training comes with the hard skills. How do you do a regression analysis? How do we set up a DOE? How do we run a 5S event? All these are very useful skills. And I tell every one of them day one, if you can't sell this, if you can't figure out how to change the leadership, and I won't even say change the leadership. If you can't sell it to the leadership, that critical skill of explaining it to them, I don't care how good you can do a DOE. I don't care how good you can do a 5S. In 15 days, it'll be gone. So without that cultural adaptation of the process, or of the education system, if you will, the rest of it just kind of falls to the side. So start with that.
Yeah. So I'm not a huge fan of the word culture, because it's one of those words that has just kind of been extended to death. In linguistics, we talk about intention and extension with words, right? And the extension is like how broad it can cover stuff. Like the F-bomb. You can use F for every word in the sentence. It has a lot of extension, right?
Yeah.
So with culture, it's almost become like mythical, where we use the word culture as a bucket that we dump all the crap in. Like that's bad culture, right? Well,
if it doesn't work, it goes in the culture bucket.
Yeah, it goes in the culture.
Oh, it didn't work.
That's a culture problem.
Yeah, it's a culture problem. Of course it is.
Yeah. Anything the engineer can't fix, right? That's a culture problem.
Yeah, it's a culture problem. Of course.
So I'm not a huge fan, but I haven't found a replacement, right? I was having this convo with Jake the other day. I'm implementing an operating system at my factory, and I'm training these guys, and I'm stealing the names for some roles, from like Gino Wickman and some of these other guys. And I don't like the names, but I also don't have time to think of a better one, So, culture is kind of what we do and say and think and feel at work every day. And I'm one of those guys that believes that culture is the outcome of management systems and processes, and can be engineered better. There's a very close correlation between the way the work is done and the culture. So I don't think it's mystical or magical or, something that you need a psychology degree to figure out, right? But it is real. And part of it's tied into, as humans, we have this tribal instinct. There's a need for belonging. And, when you're a kid at school, it's like, are you a jock or a geek or a goth? Or, like you're already breaking up into groups of people that are like you. And then within that group, like there's some kind of pecking order, well, I'm one of the popular kids, but I'm not the prom queen, whatever. This is how we behave as humans. And that has to be taken into account by good leadership, right? So it's a cultural artifact of tribalism, sorting, hierarchy, that sort of thing, which can be intentionally addressed by leadership. And actually at Zoom Operational Excellence, Jake and I have created a product called Get Awesome Now. And we designed it around like behavioral psychology and organizational psychology to change behaviors and cultures rapidly. So things like, being a filthy building to being almost perfectly clean in like 3 weeks, right? And everyone's like, wow, how do you do that? Well, we actually just put a lot of hard work and thought into how can we do that, right? Instead of this will never happen, right? So culture is a real thing, and it can change and it can be changed. However, most of the people listening to this show don't have the role or the power or the authority to change culture. So as we enter into an engagement,
Mm-hmm.
there's a part of what we do, and Jake and I actually talked about this last week. There's a part of what we do where we have to come to terms with what is the actual business that we're part of, what's
Mm-hmm.
the actual culture before we can be effective, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I totally agree with the word culture. I like that about as much as I actually like the word Lean Six Sigma, which I'm here to tell you they are both at the bottom of the barrel, which is very interesting because I love culture and I teach Lean Six Sigma, but it's the same thing. I tell people Lean Six Sigma is the title of the course. That's literally the only thing. And everybody perceives that word differently. I wish there was, I try to stick with the word process improvement as much as possible, but even then, like you said, it's just an extension of Lean Six Sigma. So it doesn't explain what it really is or can do. Same thing with culture, that word gets used incorrectly a lot, I think, or just becomes, like we said, the buzzword. Oh, that's a problem. It's a cultural problem. Oh, we had a failure today. Well, that was a cultural issue as well. I think where things change for me, kind of like what you were saying, is, it can be engineered, it can change. But then there are some people out there that say, well, you can't, we are who we are. You can't change that. I think my experience with the military has taught me that is an absolute fallacy. It's just false. There's nothing to that whatsoever. So if you were to go back to high school, interesting that you bring up high school, you're right. When we start school, everything is pure. We don't have necessarily an identity outside of our family, except for, play group on the weekend or whatever. But you grow into these tribes, and all that pureness starts to find its way to the edges. You're no longer living in this middle space. You find that group, then you find the pecking order in the group, and that's kind of where you gravitate. You go from high school to college to your work environment, and that kind of stays consistent. In high school, you have those groups, much like you said. You find your way into these groups, and you go from that pure thought of what your family has kind of brought you into what does society see you as, or how do they see you, and that sticks with you. Like I said, in high school, I was the dorky kid. I was definitely not popular. I was quiet, did not have the best grades, largely because I didn't like to do the work. I was also lazy as God knows what. So I think the Army came along at the right time in the right place. As I mentioned before, I was watching Scooby-Doo when the recruiter called me. I mean, okay, when you're 6, 7 years old on a Saturday morning, Scooby-Doo is acceptable. Not when you're 17 years old, right? Trying to graduate from high school, just to provide context, right? So, he came, like I said, he said some fancy words, showed me some fancy things, and I was like, all right, let's give this Army thing a try. I'll do it for 2 years because I need college money because I wasn't smart enough to get scholarships, and just this real, similar story for a lot of those that joined. But what I found interesting was after I joined, I went to my first duty assignment. I became a different person. I was treated differently. I was looked at differently, and it made me react differently. So I became a product of that and of that changed environment. But interestingly enough, it didn't come from my leadership. It came from other soldiers within my organization that kind of brought me in under their wing. And they're like, look, we're not going to let you fail or be this kind of person. This is how we act. So by extension, this is going to be how you act. But that's how the military is. It's not a lot of options when you're young. It's, follow my lead. Right. And as I grew into a leader, I started to recognize and remember that. So it was interesting how, we talk about culture and how does it get in there and how do we develop that ability to change, it's through experience, but it's not just about how do you deliver a message. It's how well do you understand who you're delivering the message to, because I can tell 15 soldiers the same thing and every last one of them will react differently. One of them will come in and be like, this is the great thing, best thing ever. And then one of them will come back and be like, you're the biggest dumbass I ever met in my life. And it's, you really, you span that spectrum with anybody that you talk to. So, everybody always asks, like, how do I implement especially when I'm teaching, soldiers come to the training course, and a lot of them are really jaded when they first get here because they're, mid-career NCOs or they're young lieutenants and captains, and they've just been beaten and battered, by leadership or by deployments or by up tempo being too high suicide rates. I mean, with the military, you can find this gamut of things to just crush your soul. A lot of good things, but few things that just kind of hurt you. So they come to this training wanting to learn about process improvement. And, your mind goes to the hard skills. Again, how do I do 5S? How do I do a design of experiment? How do I change something, a physical something? And the first question in their mind is like, well, how do I get my leadership to buy in? How do I get my team on board? That'll never work. We have this, the saying in the military, well, that's the flavor of today. Somebody, well, I'm going to try this to see how it works. This is Phil's good idea, not something that's tried and true. After, when we're doing, especially with black belt, it's 120 hours. It takes, 4 weeks to get through, and we have breaks in between there so the information can soak in. They can work on projects. But right about week 3, they start to understand how you can systematically move through and go from individual thoughts to team understanding. And then how you can start to build faith into leadership and those around you by changing a process systematically, as opposed to just trying it the way that somebody else told you to try it. And I tell every last one of them, they're like, well, do you have an example of a project you did for range operations? And I tell them I do, but I'm not going to give it to you. And they're like, well, that doesn't make sense. I want to see how this works. I'm like, that's not how this works. You can't change your process because that person changed their process that way. Your cultural evolution, for lack of better words, or how your team is going to change that will come from your team. And that's not you yelling at them all day long. That's from you understanding who they are, them understanding who you are. And then once you come together from a common picture, you can really do something that's, important. And we show them Tuckman's model for that reason, right? We tell them everybody goes through forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjoining. Whether you know it or not, you have that. For us in the military, we just happen to get a brand new extension of that every 18 months because we go from, think of changing your job position every 18 months. That's where we go. So yeah, not to kind of trail off on that too long, but yeah, cultural change is a strange one, and everybody always wants to know how to do it. What's the magic key? There is no magic key. There's just the ability to understand.
Yeah. So as a professional goes out, into their new job, the first helpful thing they can do is build relationships, learn about the people that you're working with, and start asking questions. What actually matters to not just my boss, but my boss's boss and the company. And I think there's a level of skill here that is deep and not emphasized enough, right? And I always tell people, I was talking to somebody online, and he said, I don't like lean. All you really need is industrial engineering. Typically this kind of thing comes from somebody who just got an engineering degree or something and discovered stuff that other people have known about for a long time, but thinks it's special.
I love this stuff you're learning. Did you know you can put sugar in your coffee? It's amazing. Thanks, boss.
So, but my response was, you do realize that the vast majority of producing companies in the world do exactly what you're saying. They all have engineers, right? What's the competitive advantage of Toyota? Why is their profits 10 times what GM's is, despite the fact that they're selling about the same number of vehicles, right? It's their management system, right? And so on the other hand, you have folks that are very bought into relationality and leadership and leading by example, team building, that sort of thing, right? And what lean does is it makes a sandwich. It brings them both together, right? Because lean, it essentially takes industrial engineering best practices and management best practices and marries them together, right? That's what's special about lean, is it deals with the human aspect as well as the technical aspect of work, mostly production work, right? Because that's what lean came out of. So sometimes folks get into these continuous improvement type of roles, right? And they don't stop and ask, what is the actual company? What's the actual values? What does this company believe in? Management system, that sort of thing, and learn all of that first. And sometimes there's the assumption, if I got hired as director of lean, then this is a lean company. Well, you know what? They're probably not. I've dealt with
most likely not.
Endless companies. You're not lean. You say you want to be, but you don't believe in the customer defining value. You don't have your business divided by value streams. You don't have pull implemented. You're just not, right? So do you want me to make you lean, or do you want me to make you more profitable with this title? Right. And a lot of the time that's what it is. Right. You can do some projects, you can have like the run of your leash, but your leash is connected to our accounting system. Right. And so I think a lot of folks can save themselves a lot of grief just by taking the time to ask questions and refrain from judging the company and the situation and just learn like what's going on here. And then how am I going to contribute to that? Right.
Yeah.
So maybe it turns out it's not your dream job or whatever. Okay. Well, you can always apply at Toyota.
Right. Yeah. They actually are lean. They actually are lean. They might be the only ones that really carry it. Yeah. I again, you see that all the time. Like when we bring people into class, they say, and we ask them same questions. It's with any other class. Hey, who are you? Where are you from? Tell us, what's your path? It's always the same thing. But so the same questions anyway for leading the class. But you always hear the same thing. They're like, I want to change processes. I'm taking that because I want to learn how to change processes. And first thing I tell them, I was like, I'm definitely not trying to burst your bubble, but while you'll learn process improvement tools, the class is about being a facilitator, not necessarily a doer. Like you're not going to go to the organization and you're the one doing the 5S independently. You're doing this. You are a facilitator. You are the one collecting the voice of the customer, not looking at yourself in the mirror, having a conversation and determining what voice of the customer would be. There's a big difference in that. And when they get hired into those roles, they assume that they're the ones on the hook for the output. It's not. You're the one on the hook to be a facilitator. Well, what is a facilitator? A facilitator is not a doer. It is somebody that has the ability to communicate effectively a thing. So I keep telling them in the training, I'm like, every time we do this, remember that. And I give them one example. And it was where I kind of had my aha moment when I went through my black belt training way back in the day. I came in and I had a project in mind, and I was just like everybody else that came into process improvement. Well, it was basically fleet management, if you will. I was going to change the process of maintaining a fleet. And, we have a lot of different Army names for that, but we'll keep all those colorful F words out of there. Cause you want to talk about F word being an extension. I think we invented that. Right. Like we use that thing like a comma most days. So which makes these meetings really hard. So I got to turn that off a little. So we had, there's this project that we were getting ready to do. And I was a warrant officer at the time in the Army. That's a subject matter expert in a field. Like my focus in life was logistics for maintenance operations. So I was going to do this project, and I was certain in my mind that we were failing because leadership was not involved down on the floor. Essentially, that's what it was. I was a subject matter expert. I knew that. I had been through the course, but when I went through the course, they didn't teach me that I was being a facilitator. They taught me what the tools were. We didn't have that conversation about Cotter's model. We didn't have that conversation about ADCAR or anything that had to do other than the fact they said, hey, as a black belt, you're a change agent. And then right off to the next thing. So as we went through the project, I learned that I had to let the project take its path, not, follow Phil's path, so to speak. My aha moment was I knew leadership was the problem. I somehow was able to step back from my own thoughts and let my team run that project. And when we got done, leadership didn't even crack the top 10 when it came to prioritized root causes, not even close. And I took that moment. I was like, but I was sure I've been doing this for 12 plus years. How is that not the problem? And it was perception. I felt culture was bad and I had to let it take place. So I tell all the students that come, I'll tell the students that come through, choking on spit, man. Damn it. All right, let's try this again. So I tell all the students when they come through, this is a course that will teach you a tool, but more importantly, we're teaching you how to facilitate. We teach you how to do the tool so you can help others learn how to use it and implement it as a team. I'll know when you do a project by yourself. I can tell when you process map on your own. I can tell when root cause analysis comes from just you because it's lacking that diversity of a group. So you're absolutely right. It seems like some people hop into some positions as, the lean practitioner of an organization. What they feel like that's their role is to the only person that does lean, as opposed to bring change to the organization and they feel on the hook for the results.
Yeah. Yeah. And, kind of going along with that, right? I think everybody's experience, you probably experienced it, with basic and then deployment, right? College and then career, right? There's a difference between the theoretical environment of learning and then the actual application of practice. When I was getting my MBA, I had a classmate who said, I look at this degree as a green card. Once I have it, people will take me seriously and I'll get to be part of the conversation. Right. Now, I disagreed with this classmate then, and I disagree more now because, your inclusion is based on getting results in almost every arena except Congress. But for
the slide that right there on the end.
But for all of us that don't get to vote for our own pay, you actually have to produce some results, right? So I'm sorry, this is not a political show, and we donate equally to both parties, which is absolutely nothing. So your inclusion is based on results. If you're in sales, you see this like immediately, like that is the job description. But then you get to operations where you have a mandate to create value or to execute on the promise of value created by sales. And it's the same thing. You might not have a compensation structure that's so blatant, but you do have to produce results, right? And the point of the education is to empower you to take action that gets results, right? So for some folks that are kind of in the continuous improvement space, the process improvement space sort of thing, we get this education, and it's good, and we learn a lot. But sometimes what's missing from that education is an understanding of the implementation once you're in the role, right? So just my method, my approach, right, is always get with the team, right? So I'm going to call it operations, whatever. This applies to like a restaurant with 5 people or whatever, as much as it does to Amazon. But the people that are doing the work, you get with the team or the teams, and you start building a set of processes where they plan what they're going to do, they do it, they check the outcomes, and then they adjust their plan for the next iteration based on what they learned. So it's a continuously learning organization that accepts the objective outcomes of their actions and tries to correlate that to inputs, which is not always that easy, right? I think I've worked exactly one place that had statistical process control charts that worked, and everywhere else, like your process isn't under control. So having a statistically significant correlation between outcomes and actions, it's not there. There's a lot of guesswork, right? So if you're using that method, you're just, it's like a farm where you've got to plow the soil and turn it over, and you got to fertilize, and then you got to plant, and then you got to water, and then you got to wait a long time. But then your 5 kernels of corn turn into like a whole acre of corn, right? And that's how this can work, as opposed to I'm going to come in and try to get results by implementing tools or methods. Well, that's not self-sustaining. It's like hybrid corn. It works for like 2 generations, and then it just dies, right?
Yeah. So I liked your plan, do, check, act in there. If nobody's scooped that up, you should try to publish that, just in case nobody's got that one yet. I think I may have heard it somewhere, though. It's possible. But either way, but the implementation is just, it's everything. Again, not to keep bringing it back to the training aspect, but that's kind of where we focus right now. We tell them the same thing, one of the biggest questions that we get asked as either soldiers are signing up or, businesses are sending groups into the training arena. They're like, hey, what book are you using? There is no book. Well, what do we follow? Well, you follow the teachings, you follow the education. We also get the similar question: what's the difference between PMP and Lean Six Sigma? Framework and methodology. You get that a lot. And I keep telling him, like, there is no body of knowledge to Lean Six Sigma like there is to PMP. They are vastly different. PMP is a framework. PMP drives timelines. Lean Six Sigma or process improvement, it drives results. And when you're driving results, everything has to change every time. That's why it's so hard to nail down a single body of knowledge, just as it would be to nail down a single textbook. Are there books that can help you? Absolutely. Am I going to follow just one of them for this training? Nope. And then the same thing when we're going through the slides, they're like, well, hey, I had a buddy that went through a slide, went through your class 2 weeks ago and you said something different. I'm like, that's because every class is different. What you're doing as a class is different. What he was doing as a class, what you're trying to achieve is different from him. And if we can't adapt to that change, I'm not really helping you learn how to act in your current roles. And that's what we start talking about, academia versus implementation, right? And I tell them all the same thing. Well, like this guy I was talking to him on Facebook the other day when I was putting some information. I was like, yeah, I just crushed green belt over the weekend, $69. And I was like, really? And he was like, yeah. And then he put this post on there. And he was like, man, I crushed green belt. He's like, I can't wait to move on and master the yellow belt skills. And I wrote back, I was like, hey, boss, you might want to ask for that $69 back, because if you crush green belt and you're moving from green to yellow, we got a problem. But I get that all the time. And they come to the training and I was like, let me set your expectations when you get here. Even with taking the 40-hour green belt or the 120-hour black belt, this is knowledge transfer. This is academia baselining at its best. You're not going to graduate my course, go back to your company, and boom, you're doing process improvement. Like you're just the wizard of all things. I'm not creating Harry Potter squad right here. We have things that we're doing. What I tell them is go to your organization. If you work somewhere that has process improvement, find the best practitioner you can find. Notice those words though, practitioner, not somebody that's just carrying the $69 certificate in their pocket. Tie yourself to that person because they understand the organization. If you can't find one, I'm happy to mentor you through. But at the end of the day, when the class graduates, we've done academia transfer. It only gives you about 20% of what you need. Implementation is going to be everything else. You are not going to do a project by yourself without somebody that has experience. My recommendation is find somebody that's either A, doing it successful in another organization, benchmarking, it's like we always talk about that, or find somebody in yours that is successful at it. Because if you just go back and you say, I have my degree now, it cost me $69, I will change your organization. They're like, that I wouldn't even let you in the front door. I'd fire you before I hire you at that point. So I was like, don't graduate my class, walking around strutting your tail feathers like I'm a black belt, I can change the world. No, boss, you can barely change your diaper, man. Let's start off with that. All right.
Yeah, it's a great call out. There's a reason that we use coaches or mentors or senseis. I have this thing where I don't use Japanese because I'm not Japanese. And
I screw those words up every time. I skip right over them.
Yeah, I mean, most of my work has been done with northern Midwestern companies. Like you go in there talking Japanese and it doesn't go over well.
Yeah.
But anyway,
fancy, do you?
Yeah, we could. That was a good impression, man.
Yeah.
But yeah, like we could get into the psychology of tribalism and in group, out group, and if you're American in an American factory and you're using all of these words, then you're screwing it up and you don't actually understand the philosophy behind lean. The Japanese use those words because they're freaking Japanese. That's their language.
It's not special, bro. It's how they talk to each other.
Right. Words themselves are actually very simple and direct. Yeah. That's the philosophy. But anyway, one of the reasons we have that is you have to apply, theory to specific situations. There's not like a playbook, right? It's highly relative. So I was working at one factory and I ran the parts warehouse, which was huge, internal and external storage, well over, 1.5 million square feet. And we had to basically pick parts and deliver them line side, at regular intervals so that production would keep flowing. And so the sort of cash value impact of what we were doing there was over $4 million a day, right? This was a significant operation. And, I had this person from corporate, come out there to help us, continuous improvement person. And, they looked at this station. And what this station did was basically stuff would get dropped off there. They would put a label on it and put it on a milk run truck, at regular intervals to go to the plant. And they said, we need to 5S this area. I was like, why? Like, well, it's a mess. You can't even tell what's going on. Like, well, you can't tell what's going on, and it is a mess. This person that's been doing the job for 15 years, they know what's going on. It's their mess. It's like my garage. Like, you ain't going to find a screwdriver, buddy, but I know where it is.
Facts. Go ahead, clean my garage. I'll never find it again.
Yeah. But that was the last station in the process, the last one, right? So 5Sing that workstation, it's not bad, but it isn't going to move the needle. It's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Because it's the tail of the process. You've already screwed up by the time you got there.
Yeah, at least 10 times. Yeah.
So I just asked this person, like, go walk through the whole value stream, right? And I just want you to look for two things. I want you to look for WIP, and I want you to look for how much WIP and the aging. Right? So if over here there's a mountain of WIP, there's a problem, right? I have a velocity mismatch between step A and step B. But I might only have one thing there. But if it's 2 days old, that's a big problem too. Yeah. And so, they did that exercise and they walked through and they came back and they were like, holy shit, you're right. Like, I want to 5S this area because corporate told me to come here and get something done and earn my salary. And I was like, that's okay. I get it. I've been in the same role. Yeah. I know how that works and the pressure. Right. So we ended up doing something a little more fruitful.
Yeah.
But
so much to learn from that there too as well, because that's even how businesses come to you as a consultant. Sometimes they come in and say, I want to do X, and they may not want to do X. It's just they only heard of X. They never heard of Y and Z or whatever letters are before that. My brain's not quick enough to process alphabet backwards, apparently. So but you get that, and same thing when we're in the training, we tell everybody, do not, there are two things that are going to be hard, but both of them are restraint. One is your restraint and one is your leadership's restraint. Yours is going to be restraint to jump ahead and do something at the tail, like you said, and the leadership's hard to restrain is when you show them something like process maps or value streams, they're going to want to jump you ahead because they're going to want to get to the tail of the problem, right? They're not letting the project take its place. But and I tell them as well, the other thing that I took away from was, there are so many tools, but you don't use all the tools at one time. So don't fixate on the one that you hear. I tell everybody, it's when you were a little kid, what was one of your favorite Christmas gifts? It was the box of 100 crayons, right? Maybe that was just me because I was a poor kid. But if I got the big box of crayons, man, I was like on cloud 10. I got a little coloring book with it. Christmas was golden. I equate that to Lean Six Sigma, right? Lean Six Sigma or any process improvement methodology, whether it's design thinking or TREZ or BPR, you pick, it doesn't matter. They all actually bleed together quite well. They're like a big box of crayons. In school or in class, I'm going to teach you all 100 crayons that are in there. But then when I give you your coloring book and you open it up and Lightning McQueen is sitting there, I said, how many crayons do you use? About 5 or 6, right? So you take out the 5 or 6 that you need, you color up Lightning, you put them back, you flip the page. Now there's, Buzz Lightyear or whoever else is next. I clearly have young kids. And I was like, now what do you do? Are you using the exact same 5 crayons? Well, no, we're using different color crayons. Like, that's the premise of what we're learning. Don't walk out of here and think one of two things. Either I have to use all 100 tools right away, or I'm going to use the same tool over and over and over again. But that's what you hear. Like, just like you said, I've heard that a million times. I have to 5S this. I agree. It is a hot dumpster fire in here. However, how did it become a hot dumpster fire? Well, I don't always start there. And that's right. That's that value stream moving backwards that often gets missed. So yes,
well,
that's very interesting.
What I like about that metaphor is the coloring book.
Yeah.
Right. So you have all these crayons. When you open that page to the coloring book, what the picture is, and you have an idea in your mind of what the finished product should look like, and you're able to color within the lines with the right colors and get that picture. And that is an element that's sometimes missing that ties in with cultural adaptation. And the reason that sometimes you have to ask a lot of questions and get to know a lot of people is precisely because, the business might not have the coloring book. They might not have the vision. They might not have targets. So I worked for a couple of actual lean companies, and they had operating systems that included you're officially certified that you're starting your lean journey at this site, which means corporate is committing to your success, right? We're going to support whatever you need. And then you get your bronze certification once certain things are in place, like
Mm-hmm.
value stream design and full production, right? And then you get silver certification on the basis of, tier meetings with, stacked charts,
Mm-hmm.
and so on and so forth. They had a really clear coloring book, right?
Mm-hmm.
They had a really clear page. You know what it's supposed to look like and where you're going,
Yeah.
and everyone's on board. I think what's challenging for me in consulting and for a lot of people that are out there trying to do process improvement and business improvement is they never get that picture. They have to tell the company, like, you're actually hired to tell the company what's the picture, right?
Yeah.
And that's where the communication and the emotional intelligence and all of that comes into play. So if you have a business group, every company is run by somebody or some group or some philosophy, right? So there's companies that are run by the venture capitalists. And if you really dig down and you ask them, we're actually run by hurdle rate. Like our ROI has to exceed our hurdle rate. Okay. I'm not going to judge that, right? You made a financial decision in acquiring this portfolio. And if you don't meet your hurdle rate financially, then first of all, you're going to divest, right?
Yeah.
And then all of these people's jobs are in question or whatever. So you're not a lean company. That's okay, right? But at least I know what page I'm coloring, right?
Yeah.
I know the coloring book that I'm in.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing I love about that coloring book is I tell them all the same thing too. I'm like, just because I'm giving you the crayons and, and maybe we're setting which picture we're going to use from the company, that doesn't mean that either of you are going to color in the lines right away, and understand that's where the shift in culture comes from, right? It's weird. I don't know why the coloring book fits so many different models, but it is. And, you have the crayons, they have the picture. You can come together and you're still going to color outside of the lines. And until you figure out how to stay within them, that's when you start, getting down there. I tell them that show was like Top Chef, or what is that one show where they had the 3 judges and you gave 4 people the exact same ingredients and then saw how they put them together.
Right.
When people come to class, I tell them the same thing. They're like, how does this work? Like when you get towards the end of class and they want to know what happens when I leave, they get very comfortable in a training environment because now everybody's learning and thinking the same way. And I say, it's going to be like that show. All of you have the exact same tools, but I'm going to put you at the chef station and all 4 of you are going to cook a different meal. But you're going to cook a meal based on what you think the leadership needs. Now, let me ask you a question. I was like, if you were able to ask the judges, what's their palate? What's their flavoring? How's their spice intake or understanding? Would you change how you cook that meal? The answer is always yes. I was like, that's exactly the same thing as the coloring book. What's the picture? If you don't understand who or what you're cooking to, you have 3 different judges and they're judging your plate differently. But that's not because they taste it differently. Each of them have a different palate, a different understanding, a different, cultural background of how they grew up eating food. It's just interesting how they all kind of intermingle, because now I just want to go, eat waffles and color my coloring book. That's kind of where I'm at this morning with all these conversations. But they're so relevant to how you run multi-billion-dollar corporations at the same time. So.
Yeah, it's like if you're making pizza for Gordon Ramsay, you better not put pineapple on it, right?
Yeah, at all. Not even a thing. I love my
Yeah.
Papa John's with pineapple. Hopefully he doesn't watch this show, because then I'll never talk to him.
So no, it's a great example, I think, and reminder for folks, right? Which is, you're not in a vacuum. This isn't Top Chef or whatever. You're not trying to beat the system. And you're on the same team. These leaders, you can go talk to them. What do you want? You can ask that question.
Use your words. Words.
So I've experienced, this internal tension or struggle many times, where the CI group, for starters, the companies are designed poorly. Honestly, they'll have an interior, consulting group like a CI group, and the compensation and everything else, doesn't align what's happening here with what's best for the company. And sometimes there's turf wars, and we have to prove our worth so that, our jobs don't get cut when there's COVID, and it's real, right? So I think what we do when the chips are down is really reveals the limits to our values. I don't want to say true values. I don't think that's accurate, but the limits to them, right? So I don't believe in like being harsh to my kids, but if my kid runs out in the road in front of a car, I'm just running out there and tackling them, right? And I'll probably yell at them, right? Because of the context. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah,
when
absolutely. They go, they're messing around at home and like, I don't know, drawing on the walls with a crayon or something, I'm not going to yell at them and go tackle them.
Yeah.
Just, for everybody out there in YouTube land, I don't condone.
You're going to give them the coloring book instead of the wall, right?
Yeah,
exactly. This coloring book.
It would be absurd. And we talk about that, like the commensurate response, right?
Yeah.
Like, is your response commensurate to the action, right? And so these types of situations reveal the limits of our values, right? During COVID, I had a friend who was a vice president of quality that got fired because the company had to cut jobs. Like some people are still going to be able to support their family and the business is going to remain. Some people aren't. Now, my personal feeling on that, if you have a vice president of quality, that's probably the last thing you should cut. Right?
Yeah, I think so.
If you need one, right, then you don't cut that role. If you never needed it, that is what it is. But I'm assuming you're in an industry.
Sure. Yeah.
And in this industry, yes, definitely needed that role. But it's a real thing. And so it makes sense for these folks who, they're like in this bucket in the company that doesn't actually deliver on the promise of value or create value. Who's going to get the axe first? Right? So I think the companies have screwed up. I think they have made a mistake in their structure and in their compensation and in their review and, how valuable is this group, right, in that process. But
like watching
it's a real
Office
thing.
Space.
Yeah. So it's a real thing. And folks get into these roles and they don't realize, like, I went through this training and this experience, and I thought that I was getting the Disney princess coloring book, and instead I got like the Dollar Tree knockoff coloring book. Right? And instead of coming to terms with that, sometimes there's this adjustment period where it's like, you have the wrong color. You're giving me the wrong coloring book. This isn't right. Mulan is Chinese, not Korean. This is completely wrong.
I know, right.
And instead of kind of just coming to terms with reality, like, this is what it is, buddy. This is this is what you got. And you can work with that. And so there's a process for coming to terms with the culture of the business and coming to terms with what's really going on. And it's possible that you were hired to make change and not be instead of being a facilitator. And that might turn into, or might need to turn into, a conversation with your boss. Say, hey, let me explain the gap between the expectations I had and what I'm seeing now. Right? I was trained to be a facilitator because this is a necessary part of implementing long-term lasting change for your company. And I was sold this role on the basis of that. And now that I'm in here, I'm finding out through my performance reviews and so on and so forth that what you guys really want is business results, and nobody in your business has been able to get them yet. And so now you hired me to get those results. And here's the concerns I have with that. Right? So just the ability to have those adult conversations, if I can call them that.
They absolutely are needed. They are needed. I tell the people that come to class, what I tell a company when I start working with them is, are you asking for lean for the perception or the process? Going back to what you're saying, because that's two different reasons to put it in place. If you want it for the perception, then you can save a lot of money. You can just hire somebody that has the $69 certificate and be okay with that. If you're here for the process, that's going to be like you said, that's a very different conversation. And that becomes a two-way street. Do you need me? Do I need you? Let's be clear about what your expectations are. Is it for me to facilitate, or is it for me to be the change, the doer up front, and then, transition to a facilitator down the road as we start to change that in the organization. But that needs more than $69 of training, in my opinion. So,
right. But anyway, getting back to real life. So, the learning of what you actually got hired to do, what really matters, and then having those open conversations, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're bringing up some really good points about what did you hire me to do, and no, you actually want me to be a change agent. And sometimes, you want the perception of lean, not the process of lean, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we actually mentioned this last week in the podcast because we've seen it so much. There are companies where the continuous improvement or lean thing is for sales. That's what it's for. Like this company, and this is really bad in third-party logistics, to be honest with you. They want to win business from Nike, for example, and Nike has this initiative for their partners to be lean, part of their lean supply chain. And so, the 3PL will basically advertise themselves as, hey, we're a lean company. We hired this guy and we have this, CI group or whatever, this lean group. And sometimes it's just enough to fool the customer to think, oh, okay, they know, they're lean or whatever. But those roles, like you're not actually hired to do lean, right? So don't, mistake what you're actually hired to do with the title. That's a marketing thing right there.
So they really don't know what to put in the job description.
No, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
how do you make that succinct into one, into a couple of words on Indeed, right? It doesn't, I need you to come in and reorganize my mess. Like nobody's going to get hired for that job.
Yeah, and can you even do it, right? Like, your business is engineered to give you these outcomes. It's perfectly engineered to get you where you're at, right? So we have to have a conversation about what processes are we going to change, right? And that's, where Lean Six Sigma, for example, kind of shines, is understanding business processes, right? The outcomes you're getting is the result of a system of processes, and that's what has to change, right? You can't come in like as a new leader and, I'm the new sheriff in town. Things are going to change. We're going to do it this way, and this way, and, get on board or get run over or whatever, and actually see any change. Like you'll see some short-term change. There we go.
Yeah.
But sometimes after that, it's even worse, right?
Yeah. I get asked the exact same question all the time, by everybody. They're like, what's so special about a master black belt, or what is a master black belt? And, again, what's special, but I tell them absolutely nothing whatsoever, nothing at all. And they're like, oh, well, you must know more than everybody else. No, I really don't. Well, are there different tools that I'll learn? Absolutely not. Well, then what's so special about it? I was like, literally being able to ask the right question at the right time and having the experience to know when that is. That's literally like, that should be the definition of a master black belt. And I was like, and that's, again, it's just a title. I don't care whether you're white on white belt, yellow, green, black, master black belt, have never, ever had formal training. Being effective in a process improvement position means you know how to ask the right question at the right time, and and be able to translate that into something actionable. And that's what makes it, I won't say special, but useful. We'll go with useful. So, it was interesting for Jake while he's sitting there in his jail cell rotting away. We actually, had my Army buddies kind of kicking ideas around one day, and we always, the Army's a very interesting place. We use colorful words, and we don't think like the rest of society. Some days we kind of tangent out there. We had actually come up with a structure of roles and responsibilities as process improvement related to, again, the prostitute industry, if you will. Like we were titling them pimps and hoes. So I was like, well, the pimp, he's running things, right? Process improvement, managing practitioner. He's my pimp. And they were like, yeah, but what are the other roles? And it's like, well, it's all the hoes, they're the helping operational excellence people, right? That's essentially what they're doing. So Jake, there's hope, man. LSS roles and responsibilities fit in the prostitute. Keep up the fight, brother.
Yeah. I think the challenge that I keep running into with a lot of folks that are in the continuous improvement space is a disconnect between understanding business management and how they kind of fit into that. That's really the reason that Jake and I started Zoom Operational Excellence is, I have an MBA. I run large operations. Jake came up through operations as well. And when we got introduced to lean, for me, it was in manufacturing and then tier one automotive manufacturing. When we got exposed to it, we realized really quickly, like, we were in the business management side, and there was really only two buckets. There was the companies that, like, the C-suite and board of directors were committed. We are a lean company. We are going to start with customer defined value stream structure to our organization, pull production, and we're attempting to reduce the demand to cash time by eliminating waste, right? And then there was the other bucket, and the other bucket is just everybody else. And most of the companies we worked for were in this bucket. So to kind of put a bow on the episode today and wrap it up, if you have taken a role in continuous improvement, or you're a consultant, or you're an internal consultant, and you find yourself in this bucket, relax, take a deep breath. It's perfectly normal. 99% of companies are in this bucket. But you do have to come to terms with the culture. You do have to have conversations with people. Find out, like, what do the leaders actually want? What do they actually expect from you? Cut through, the BS and all of the fancy words, and you can just pitch that job description right in the trash. Somebody, some 20-year-old intern wrote that anyway. Go talk to the CFO, right? Find out what's really going on. And then you'll have a context for applying the knowledge and the learning that you have, and be successful where it counts, which is where your boss wants it to count, right?
Yeah. I guess if I had to give one last statement, to follow with that, it would just be, if you are doing formal training prior to, if you're not just building off of experience, know that that's not the baseline. When or know that is just the baseline. That's not the way that you're going to do things. So just like you said, when they're in that other bucket, relax, take a breath, and be okay with the fact that you don't have all the answers on day one. The training just gives you a way to start asking the right questions so you can become part of the team, essentially.
That's a great word, Phil. We appreciate you coming on the show, and also what you're doing out there in Lean, Alaska. Of course, we'll put the link to Lean Alaska down below. Why don't you tell folks how they can get in touch with you?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it is Alaska, so if you happen to have a dog sled team hanging around, they do a good job making it up here. We're a little remote, so pigeon carriers are also helpful. I'm really just kidding. We have normal stuff here, I promise. So, I don't hide my number from anybody. If, anybody would like a phone conversation, whether it's about training or just, networking in general, my number is 907-203-7716, or you can send me an email at phil@leanalaska.com. And I don't do all the social medias, but I primarily stick with LinkedIn and Facebook, and it's just Phil Ranck on either of those. You will be underwhelmed, I promise you, but I am on both of them.
Well, Phil, we appreciate it. Of course, we will put the links, your number, email, etc., in the video for folks to check you out. And if you're in the Alaska area, be sure to check Phil out with Lean Alaska, and he can help you with the training needs that you have, as well as help you network. If you're looking for something that Phil doesn't provide, you can connect with somebody who can. So take advantage of that. We love building those relationships here on LinkedIn and other professional platforms. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Land.
Great conversation. Great seeing you. See you later.
Doesn't show up to work tomorrow. Well, I guess prostitution is still illegal in Texas. So, you live and learn. So he didn't hire any prostitutes. He was trying to prostitute himself. So
that makes more sense.